It had been a long day at work, and the single dad was hurrying down the street with his little daughter holding his hand. The evening was gray and a soft drizzle had started to fall, making the pavement shine under the dull streetlights. He pulled his jacket tighter and looked down at the small umbrella his daughter was trying to keep over both of them. She was only 7 and her tiny hands kept struggling with the handle, but her determination made him smile. The bus stop was just a few steps away. They planned to catch the bus home, eat something warm, and then maybe watch a cartoon together before bed. That was their small routine, one that kept them close even when the world felt too heavy. He always tried to give her a sense of safety, because he knew how much she needed it. After all, it had been just the two of them for a few years now, ever since life had taken an unexpected turn and left him as both mother and father. As they reached the shelter of the bus stop, he noticed a few other people waiting. Everyone seemed tired, lost in their own thoughts, scrolling through phones or staring into the street as though willing the bus to arrive sooner. The drizzle had turned into a heavier rain, and the sound of water hitting the glass roof above them created a steady rhythm. Then, suddenly, it happened. A figure rushed toward the stop, slipping on the wet pavement. Before he could process it, she stumbled right into his arms. He caught her instinctively, steadying her before she fell to the ground. She clutched at his sleeve for balance, her breath uneven, as though she had been running or holding something back. "Careful," he said gently, making sure she was upright. "Are you all right?" She nodded quickly, though her face showed a different story. Her eyes glistened, not just from the rain, but from something deeper, something she was trying to hide. She brushed her damp hair away from her forehead and whispered a small thank you, her voice trembling. His daughter peeked around his side, her eyes wide with curiosity. Children notice things adults sometimes miss, and she tilted her head, studying the stranger with innocent interest. Without saying a word, she offered a tiny smile, the kind that could warm even the coldest moment. The woman seemed surprised by that smile. Her lips curved into the faintest response, almost unwillingly, but it was there. She glanced at the man again and then stepped back as if embarrassed for having leaned on someone she didn't know. "It's okay," he said, reading the awkwardness in her posture. "The ground's slippery in this rain." She nodded once more, clutching her bag tightly against her chest. Something about her looked fragile, not in the way of weakness, but in the way of someone carrying too much weight on their shoulders. He didn't ask questions. After all, she was a stranger. But he couldn't ignore the way her hands shook slightly as she adjusted her coat. The rain kept pouring, and the bus was nowhere in sight. Time stretched longer than usual, and the silence around the stop felt heavy. Every now and then he caught the woman glancing his way, almost as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the courage. His daughter, however, had no such hesitation. She tugged at his sleeve and then looked at the woman with wide eyes. "You almost fell," she said softly, her voice carrying the honesty only a child could give. The woman blinked, then crouched slightly so she could meet the little girl's gaze. "I did," she admitted with a small laugh, though her laugh sounded more like a sigh. "But your dad caught me." The child nodded proudly, as though her father had just done something heroic. She held onto his hand tighter, as if to say that she already trusted the woman enough to share that moment. The man felt a strange pull in his chest. Something about this unexpected meeting stirred an old part of him, the part that remembered how sudden encounters could change the course of a day or a life. But he brushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the here and now. The minutes dragged on. The rain blurred the view of passing cars, and the cold breeze carried the scent of wet asphalt. The woman shifted her weight from one foot to the other, clearly restless. Finally, she took a deep breath, as though gathering courage for something. "You must think I'm clumsy," she said, her voice quiet, almost lost in the sound of rain. "Not at all," he replied kindly. "Anyone could have slipped in this weather." She gave a faint smile, but then her expression changed. Her lips parted and she seemed to wrestle with herself. Then, unexpectedly, she spoke again, this time with a rawness that caught him off guard. "I wasn't just running from the rain," she said. I didn't know where else to go." The words hung in the air between them. He studied her carefully, not sure how much to say, but he didn't see dishonesty in her eyes, only exhaustion, fear, and maybe a plea for understanding. His daughter looked up at him, sensing the heaviness of the moment even if she didn't fully understand it. She squeezed his hand, silently reminding him that sometimes listening was more powerful than speaking. The woman quickly shook her head, almost as if regretting what she had said. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I shouldn't burden strangers with my problems." "You're not a burden," he said gently. "Sometimes talking helps, even if it's just for a few minutes while we wait for the bus." For the first time, her shoulders relaxed slightly, though her eyes were still clouded. She seemed unsure whether to continue, but something in his calm tone and perhaps in the simple presence of his daughter gave her the courage to stay. The drizzle outside softened, though the storm clouds still lingered. The bus had not yet arrived, and in that small pocket of time, the three of them stood together, one man, his daughter, and a woman who had quite literally fallen into their lives. It wasn't clear yet why she had spoken those words or what story she carried within her. But the man couldn't ignore the feeling that this encounter was not just chance. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew one thing for certain. Sometimes the people you meet in the most ordinary places end up changing your life in ways you never expected. And on that rainy evening, at a bus stop like any other, something had quietly begun. The rain had slowed down to a light drizzle, but the bus was still nowhere in sight. The man shifted his weight as he stood, his little girl leaning gently against his side. The woman he had caught earlier was still there, her hands gripping the strap of her bag as though it was the only thing keeping her steady. She seemed like someone who had 1,000 words waiting at the edge of her lips, but none of them were easy to say. The girl glanced up at her father, and then back at the woman. She tilted her head with curiosity, noticing the sadness in the woman's face even if she didn't fully understand it. Children had a way of seeing things that adults sometimes missed, and in that moment, her innocent gaze made the woman lower her eyes as though she couldn't hide what she felt any longer. The man cleared his throat softly. "You said before you didn't know where else to go." His voice wasn't demanding. It was calm, gentle, like someone asking a friend if they were okay. The woman gave a faint smile, though it looked tired, worn out. "Yes," she whispered. Then she looked away as if unsure whether she had already said too much. He didn't press her. He simply stood, holding his daughter's hand, giving the stranger the space to speak if she wanted to. Silence wrapped around them for a few minutes, filled only by the sound of rain dripping from the bus stop roof. Finally, the woman sighed, her breath shaky. "I don't usually talk to people I don't know," she began, her eyes fixed on the wet pavement. "But something about tonight. I couldn't hold it in anymore." The man listened. He didn't shift or frown or give her the look people often gave when they were too busy to care. Instead, his quiet attention encouraged her to keep going. "I left home this morning after a fight," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "It wasn't just a small argument. It was the kind that makes you feel like you don't belong anywhere. I grabbed my things and walked out. I thought I'd figure it out, but I didn't." Her words hung in the air, fragile but heavy. The little girl squeezed her father's hand, sensing the seriousness even though she didn't understand all of it. The man bent slightly, brushing a strand of wet hair from his daughter's cheek before looking back at the woman. "You've been out all day?" he asked softly. She nodded. "I walked for hours. I sat on benches in coffee shops, but I felt like everywhere I went people could see how lost I was, so I just kept moving, and then I was running through the rain and I slipped and, well, I fell right into you." Her attempt at a small laugh quickly faded. Her eyes glistened, not from the rain this time, but from tears she was trying hard to hide. The man felt a pull inside his chest. He knew the look of someone carrying pain too big for their frame. He had seen it in himself once, in those hard months after his life had changed forever. He didn't say that, though. He just gave a slow nod. "Sometimes life doesn't wait until you're ready," he said. "It just throws you into moments you never expected." The woman blinked, her lips parting as if those words were exactly what she had been waiting for someone to say. "Yes," she whispered. "That's how it feels." The bus stop was quiet again, except for the occasional splash of water as cars rushed past. A man across the shelter scrolled on his phone, barely noticing the three of them. To him, they were just strangers passing the time. But in that little corner of the rainy night, something unspoken was happening. An exchange of trust between two people who had never met before. The little girl shifted, pulling something out of her pocket. It was a wrapped candy, slightly squished but still good. She held it out to the woman with her small hand. "You can have this," she said. her voice soft but full of certainty. The woman looked startled, her eyes darting from the child to her father, as if asking if it was okay to accept. He gave a small nod. With careful fingers, the woman took the candy, staring at it like it was more than just a sweet. "Thank you," she whispered. Her lips trembled as she smiled at the child, and for the first time that night her face lit up with something warm. The girl beamed, happy to see her small gesture make a difference. She leaned back against her father, content as though she had done exactly what was needed. The man studied the woman again. "It must have taken a lot for you to walk away," he said quietly. Her shoulders slumped and she shook her head. "It felt like I had no choice. Staying would have broken me, but leaving makes me feel like I'm floating with no place to land. I keep wondering if I made a mistake." He wanted to tell her that sometimes mistakes lead to better roads, that sometimes walking away is the only way to find yourself. But he also knew she wasn't asking for advice. She just needed someone to hear her, to let her words exist without judgment, so he simply said, "You're not alone right now. You're here. That matters." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't bother to wipe away. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked softly, almost in disbelief. He looked down at his daughter, who was watching the raindrops slide down the glass wall of the shelter. Then he looked back at the woman. "Because I know how much kindness can mean when you least expect it," he replied. "And because my daughter's here. She reminds me every day that the world can still be gentle, even when it feels hard." The woman pressed her lips together, holding back a sob. She quickly covered her mouth, trying to compose herself, but her body trembled. For a moment, she looked like she might collapse again, not from slipping, but from the weight of everything she carried. Without thinking too much, the man shifted slightly closer, not invading her space, but letting her know she wasn't invisible. His daughter, too, leaned forward, her innocent eyes filled with quiet concern. The three of them stood there in the cold rain, bound not by history but by a fragile moment of trust. Finally, the woman spoke again, her voice softer now. "I thought when I left home that nobody would care, that I'd just disappear into the noise of the city. But then I fell into your arms, and for the first time today I don't feel completely invisible." The man let her words sink in. He felt something stir inside him. Not pity, not obligation, but recognition. He knew what it was like to feel invisible, to wonder if anyone would notice if you fell apart. And here she was, standing before him, saying the same thing he had once thought. "You're not invisible," he said firmly. "Not tonight. Not here." The bus headlights finally appeared in the distance, glowing through the misty rain. People at the stop began to gather their things, ready to climb aboard. But the woman hesitated, her feet frozen to the spot. She clutched her bag, staring at the approaching bus as if it were a decision she wasn't ready to make. The man noticed. He didn't rush her. He simply stood by, his daughter's small hand still holding his, waiting to see what the woman would do. And in that hesitation, in the pause before the bus arrived, the story between them was just beginning. The bus pulled up with a loud hiss, its brakes squealing as water splashed from the street. People around the shelter began moving quickly, stepping onto the bus with hurried motions, shaking the rain from their coats. The man glanced at the woman beside him, and he noticed that she still hadn't moved. She stood frozen, her bag clutched tightly to her chest, her eyes on the open doors as though they were asking her to make a choice she wasn't ready for. His daughter tugged his hand gently, looking up at him with questioning eyes. She didn't say anything, but he understood what she was asking. Were they going to get on? He looked at the woman once more, sensing that if she stepped onto that bus alone, she might slip further into the loneliness she had been describing. The line of people slowly thinned. A few seats filled, and the driver glanced impatiently at those who lingered. At the last moment, the woman shook her head slightly, stepping back. I can't," she whispered, more to herself than to him. The man gave a small nod as though her decision needed no explanation. "Then we'll wait for the next one," he said calmly. His daughter looked surprised, but she trusted her father's judgment and sat back down on the bench, swinging her small legs. The bus doors closed with a hiss, and it rolled away into the rain, leaving behind the quiet hum of the city. For a moment, the woman stared at him, her brows furrowed. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "I know," he replied, brushing a drop of rain from his daughter's hair. "But sometimes waiting a little longer doesn't hurt." Something in the way he said it made her throat tighten. She sat down on the bench as well, releasing her grip on the bag ever so slightly. The drizzle outside softened, and the night seemed calmer now. as though time had slowed for just the three of them. The little girl pulled a crayon from her small backpack, along with a folded piece of paper she had been scribbling on earlier. She plopped it onto her lap and began to color, her concentration fierce. Every few seconds she would glance up at the woman, then back at her paper. Finally, she leaned over and said, "You look sad." The woman blinked at her. Children never danced around the truth the way adults did. She swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. "Sometimes people feel sad," she said carefully. The girl nodded as if that explained everything. Then she added, "When I feel sad, Daddy hugs me. And then it doesn't feel so big anymore." The woman's lips trembled at that. She turned her gaze toward the man who was watching quietly, letting the moment unfold. He gave a small smile, the kind that didn't push but reassured. She didn't know why, but it felt like his presence had steadied the storm inside her, even if only a little. To break the silence, he spoke. "You know, it hasn't always been easy for me either." Her eyes flicked toward him. Something in his tone told her he wasn't just saying that to comfort her. He was telling the truth. He shifted slightly, looking out at the wet street before speaking again. "A few years ago, I lost my wife. One day we were a family of 3, and the next, it was just me and her." He nodded toward his daughter, who was still busy coloring. "I didn't think I could handle it. There were nights I didn't sleep, days I thought I'd break apart. But she—" He paused, looking at his daughter with gentle eyes. "She gave me a reason to keep standing. She was so small and she needed me, and maybe that's what saved me." The woman's chest ached at his words. She hadn't expected him to open up, not like this. She realized now that his kindness wasn't just politeness. It came from someone who understood pain, someone who knew what it was like to carry something heavy and not know where to put it down. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He shook his head. "Don't be. Life happens. We can't change it, but we can learn to live with it." The woman lowered her gaze. "I wish I had that strength." "You do," he said simply. "Sometimes it just takes someone else to remind you." His daughter, oblivious to the heaviness of their conversation, finished her drawing and held it up proudly. It was a simple picture, stick figures holding hands under a big, bright sun. She showed it to the woman with a big smile. "This is you," she said, pointing to a figure with long hair. "This is Daddy and this is me." The woman's eyes widened. She pressed her hand to her chest, overcome by the innocent kindness of a child she had only just met. Her throat burned as she whispered, "You drew me?" The girl nodded cheerfully. "Because you're here. You're with us." The man watched quietly, letting the moment sink in. He knew his daughter's heart was pure, and sometimes she saw things far clearer than adults did. The woman blinked back tears, holding the little drawing carefully as if it were something precious. They sat there for a long time, the three of them sharing a quiet companionship under the shelter of the bus stop. The storm outside no longer felt so sharp. The woman began to relax bit by bit, her shoulders no longer drawn so tightly, her breath steadier. After a while, the man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small snack bar. He handed it to his daughter, who unwrapped it and broke it neatly in half. Without hesitation, she offered the other half to the woman. The woman hesitated, then took it, her fingers brushing the little girl's hand. "Thank you," she said softly. "You're welcome," the girl replied matter-of-factly before taking a big bite of her half. The man chuckled quietly, shaking his head. "She has her own way of sharing the world." The woman smiled for the first time that night, a genuine smile that softened her whole face. For a moment, she didn't feel like the girl who had run away, or the stranger with no place to go. She just felt human again. As another bus approached in the distance, the man noticed her body stiffen once more, but this time she didn't look quite as lost. He leaned slightly toward her. "You don't have to decide everything tonight," he said gently. "Sometimes just breathing is enough." Her eyes met his and she nodded slowly. "Thank you. For listening. For not treating me like I'm broken." "You're not broken," he said firmly. "You're just in the middle of your story. And maybe tonight is part of the turning point." She looked at him with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. She didn't know why she had spilled her heart to a man she had met at a bus stop, but she felt lighter for it. Maybe fate really did place people in each other's paths when they needed it most. The bus finally pulled up again, its lights cutting through the rain. People began to rise, gathering their things. This time the woman didn't freeze. She stood slowly, looking at the man and his daughter. She wasn't sure what the next step would be, but she knew she wasn't as alone as she had felt just hours earlier. And as she stepped closer to the bus doors, her hand brushing against the child's drawing tucked safely into her pocket, she realized something important. Sometimes strangers could see you more clearly than the people you'd known all your life. That night at the bus stop, she hadn't just fallen into someone's arms by accident. She had fallen into a moment that might just change the direction of her life. The bus doors opened with their usual hiss, and the warm air from inside spilled out into the cold night. Passengers shuffled on, their wet shoes squeaking against the steps. The woman stood near the entrance, her fingers gripping her bag, her eyes darting between the open doors and the man standing behind her with his daughter. She wanted to step forward, to sit down on one of those seats and let the bus carry her away from this moment, away from everything, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. She didn't know where to go. She had no address to type into her phone, no friend waiting at the other end of the route. The thought of riding aimlessly through the night made her chest tighten with panic. The man noticed her hesitation. He had seen it before in himself when he didn't know what tomorrow would bring. His daughter tugged at his hand, eager to get home, but he crouched slightly so his eyes met the woman's level. "You don't have to go if you're not ready," he said quietly. "There will be another bus." She let out a shaky breath, stepping back from the doors. The driver gave her an impatient look before closing them and pulling away. The rumble of the bus faded into the distance, leaving the three of them once again in the soft drizzle. The woman shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what I'm doing. I thought leaving would give me freedom, but now I feel more lost than ever." His daughter, holding tightly to his hand, looked up at her with big, thoughtful eyes. She didn't say anything, but her expression was enough. It was the kind of silent compassion only a child could offer. The man straightened, brushing his thumb over his daughter's knuckles. He glanced at the woman, her damp hair falling into her face, her shoulders slumped. Something in him wouldn't let her walk back into the storm alone. "Listen," he said gently, choosing his words with care. "It's late. You've had a hard day, and you probably haven't eaten much, have you?" She hesitated, embarrassed, before shaking her head. "Not really. Just some coffee earlier." He gave a small nod as though he already guessed. "Why don't you come with us for a meal? Nothing fancy. Just something warm. We live nearby and you don't have to decide anything tonight. Just sit, eat, and breathe for a while." Her eyes widened. "I couldn't. I don't want to intrude." "You're not intruding," he said softly. "Sometimes people need a place to pause before they figure out their next step. Everyone deserves that." The little girl perked up, tugging at her father's sleeve. "We can share my blanket," she said with a smile, her innocence breaking the heaviness of the moment. The woman's throat tightened. For hours she had felt invisible, like a shadow moving through the city. Now here she was, being invited into the small world of a father and daughter who barely knew her. It felt unreal. She bit her lip, glancing down the street as if searching for another option. But deep down she knew she had none. She nodded slowly, her voice trembling. "If you're sure, then maybe just for a little while." His daughter clapped her hands softly, delighted. The man smiled faintly, a look of quiet relief crossing his face. "All right," he said. "Let's get out of this rain." They walked together through the damp streets, the little girl swinging her father's hand and humming a tune. The woman trailed slightly behind, unsure, but as they turned corners and passed glowing shop windows, she felt something she hadn't felt all day, a fragile sense of safety. Their home was small, but warm. The man unlocked the door and stepped inside, helping his daughter out of her wet shoes. The girl dashed toward her room to grab her favorite blanket, while her father offered the woman a towel. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "Dry off a little. Make yourself comfortable." She accepted it gratefully, pressing the soft fabric to her damp hair. Her eyes moved around the room. It wasn't fancy, just a modest living space filled with the little touches of a home. Children's drawings taped to the fridge, books stacked on a low shelf, a pair of worn slippers by the couch. It felt lived in. It felt real. The smell of home cooking lingered faintly in the air, and her stomach twisted with hunger. She hadn't realized how empty she was until now. The man went into the kitchen, pulling out simple ingredients. He didn't ask her what she wanted. He just began preparing something warm and filling. His movements were steady, practiced. the kind of routine someone learns when they've had to take care of others for a long time. His daughter returned with a small blanket draped over her arms. She walked up to the woman and offered it with both hands. "You can use this," she said proudly. "It's my favorite, but I want you to have it tonight." The woman took it, her eyes stinging with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. She draped it over her shoulders, feeling the unexpected comfort of being cared for even by someone so young. Soon, the man placed bowls on the small dining table. Steam rose from the food, carrying a rich, savory smell. They sat together, father, daughter, and stranger, sharing a meal in the glow of a small lamp. The woman hesitated at first, unsure if she belonged at their table. But the little girl dug into her bowl happily, chatting about her day at school, and the man listened with patient smiles. Slowly, the woman picked up her spoon and tasted the food. It was simple, but it filled her with warmth she hadn't realized she craved. Halfway through the meal, she set her spoon down, her voice breaking softly. "I don't even know why you're doing this. You don't know me. For all you know, I could just disappear tomorrow and you'd never see me again." The man met her gaze. "That's true," he said calmly. "But tonight you needed kindness, and sometimes that's reason enough." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes shimmering. No one had said words like that to her in years. The little girl leaned her chin on her hand, smiling at her father as if proud of him. "Daddy always helps people," she said. "That's what he does." The woman let out a shaky laugh, her first real one of the night. "You're lucky to have him." "I know," the girl replied with complete certainty, making both adults smile. After dinner, the girl curled up on the couch with her blanket, fighting to keep her eyes open. The woman sat quietly beside her, brushing damp strands of hair from her face. It felt strange yet natural, as though she had been invited into this world for a reason. The man cleared the dishes and returned, watching his daughter slowly drift to sleep. The room was quiet, filled only with the sound of soft breathing and the faint ticking of a clock. The woman turned to him, her eyes softer now. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring," she admitted. "But tonight, I feel like I can breathe again." "That's all that matters right now," he said gently. "One step at a time." She nodded, pressing the borrowed blanket closer around her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was running or hiding. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she had landed in the right place, even if only for a night. And as she sat there, with the glow of the lamp casting warmth over the small room, she realized something important. Sometimes family wasn't just the people you were born into. It could also be the people who reached out their hands when you needed it most. That night, a single act of kindness became the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. The next morning, the first light of day filtered gently through the small curtains of the living room. The woman stirred on the couch, wrapped in the blanket the little girl had given her. For the first time in weeks, she slept peacefully, without the weight of running, hiding, or pretending. She opened her eyes slowly, taking in the soft glow of the room, the quiet hum of the city outside, and the gentle rhythm of someone else's life already beginning to stir. The man was in the kitchen, carefully making breakfast, and his daughter was perched on a stool, swinging her legs and humming softly. When the woman's eyes found them, she felt a strange, quiet warmth inside her chest. It was a feeling she hadn't felt in a long time: normalcy, safety, and the sense of being accepted without questions or judgment. "Good morning," the man said softly when he noticed her waking. "Sleep well?" She nodded, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. "Yes, thank you." Her voice was still soft, uncertain, as though speaking aloud in someone else's home was both foreign and comforting. His daughter grinned, her small hands clutching the edge of the stool. "I hope you're hungry. Daddy makes pancakes sometimes and I get to stir the batter." The woman smiled, feeling a genuine laugh rise in her throat for the first time in days. "I think I'd like that," she said. As the three of them moved through the morning, the woman realized something remarkable. There was no rush, no expectation, no judgment, just a rhythm of ordinary life that had been absent from her days for far too long. The simple acts, pouring milk, flipping pancakes, laughing at a small mess made by a child, felt like small miracles. She noticed the little things about this father and daughter, the way they moved through their home together, the way their glances carried quiet understanding. She saw love, steady and unspoken, in their every interaction. and for the first time she allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to belong somewhere again, even if only a little. After breakfast, they cleaned up together. The little girl went off to her room to play, leaving the two adults alone for a moment. The woman hesitated, then spoke. "I don't even know your names," she said softly, as if the act of asking made her nervous. He smiled faintly. "You don't need to know mine right now, but it's okay if you want to." She nodded slowly, feeling a strange courage rise inside her. I'm just me. I don't have much else to offer right now." He shook his head gently. "Being yourself is more than enough. That's all anyone can ask for." For a long moment, they simply stood there, letting the silence speak for them. And then, without warning, the little girl came bounding into the room holding a stuffed animal. "This is your new friend," she declared, handing it to the woman with a wide grin. The woman laughed, the sound breaking the last of the tension in her chest. She took the toy carefully, feeling its softness and the pure intention behind the child's gift. She realized then that this small household, this tiny moment of connection, was already starting to change her. Over the next few days, she stayed with them. She helped around the small apartment, played games with the little girl, and slowly began to open up about her own life. She spoke cautiously at first, about her family and the arguments that had made her feel like running away was her only option. The father listened, never judging, never interrupting, simply allowing her words to exist. It wasn't easy for her to trust so quickly. Years of being ignored, dismissed, or misunderstood had taught her to keep walls around her heart. But this father and his child had a way of letting her in without demanding anything, without rushing her. And slowly those walls began to crumble. One evening, after they had finished dinner, the man suggested they go for a short walk. The air was cool and clean after a rain, and the streets were quieter than usual. The woman hesitated at first, unsure if she belonged in this ordinary life, but the man simply smiled. "No pressure. Just come along." The little girl grabbed her hand, tugging her forward with all the excitement only a child could muster. As they walked together, the woman felt a surprising sense of peace. She noticed the simple joys, the sound of leaves rustling in the breeze, the laughter of children playing in the distance, the way the city felt alive yet safe at the same time. At one point, they stopped at a small park. The little girl ran ahead to the swings, and the woman sat on a bench watching her spin and laugh. The man joined her, sitting silently beside her. "You know," he said quietly, "sometimes life throws us into moments we don't expect, and sometimes we meet people who remind us there's still good in the world. Maybe that's what tonight or last night was for you." She looked at him, her throat tight. "I didn't know anyone could care like this." "Not really. And I didn't know I could feel safe, not in a long time." He nodded. "Sometimes safety isn't about walls or locks. It's about people who are willing to be there for you even when they don't have to." Tears sprang to her eyes. She hadn't realized how much she had needed that until now. She had run, hidden, and held herself apart for so long that the idea of being cared for felt almost unreal. And yet here she was, sitting in the evening air with two people who had welcomed her without question. The little girl ran back to them, breathless and smiling. "Let's come here every night," she said. The woman laughed softly, shaking her head. "I don't think I can promise that," she said. But inside she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. As days turned into weeks, the woman began to rebuild her life. She found a small job nearby, allowing her to gain some independence, but she continued to spend time with the father and daughter. They celebrated small victories together, a good day at work, a finished drawing, a shared meal. And slowly she realized that her life, which had felt empty and directionless, was beginning to take shape in a way she hadn't imagined. The father noticed the change too. He saw her confidence grow, her laughter become more frequent, and the way she interacted with his daughter, not just as a visitor, but as someone who cared, who belonged. He didn't push her into any role or expectation. He simply allowed her to find her place, and in doing so, she became a part of their small family in the gentlest way possible. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, the woman spoke softly. "I didn't know I could feel like this again," she said. "Like I actually matter to someone." "You do," the man replied. "To both of us. And to yourself too. You just needed a place to pause and breathe. Sometimes that's all it takes." She nodded, tears threatening but not falling. "Thank you. For everything. For listening, for caring, for letting me stay." He shook his head. You didn't take anything from us. You gave us the chance to help someone who needed it. That's not a burden, it's a privilege. The little girl leaned against her father's side, holding her hand tightly. We're glad you're here, she said simply, her words echoing the truth that no amount of explanation could capture. And in that moment, the woman realized that life had a strange way of bringing people together. She had stumbled literally and figuratively into the lives of these two strangers, and in doing so, they had changed each other's lives forever. Time continued to pass, and the three of them developed a quiet routine. They laughed, played, shared meals, and even weathered small disagreements just like any family would. But unlike before, the woman no longer felt invisible. She felt seen, valued, and accepted. She understood that family wasn't always defined by blood. It could also be defined by kindness, trust, and shared moments of vulnerability. Years later, she would remember that rainy night at the bus stop. She would remember how she had fallen into a stranger's arms expecting nothing, and had found a place where she could breathe again. That night wasn't just the beginning of her new life. It was proof that sometimes the most unexpected encounters could lead to the deepest changes. The single father and his daughter never forgot it either. They remembered the woman who appeared out of the rain, the stranger who became family, and how a simple act of compassion had grown into something that touched all their lives. And so, from that night forward, their lives were intertwined in ways they could not have foreseen. A chance encounter, a moment of trust, and a willingness to show kindness had created a bond that would last far longer than any storm, far longer than any fleeting moment of fear or loneliness. In the end, the woman, the father, and the little girl had all discovered something precious, that even in the darkest moments, people could find each other, care for one another, and change the course of life with something as simple as a hand offered, a meal shared, and a heart willing to trust again. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of life settled gently around the little household. The woman had begun to feel a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in years. The father and his daughter had become her quiet anchors in a world that often felt chaotic and harsh. Mornings were no longer rushed or lonely. She woke up to the sound of laughter, the smell of breakfast, and the warmth of a home where she wasn't invisible. She had found a small job at a local bookstore, a place where she could interact with people at her own pace. The work was steady but not overwhelming, and for the first time in a long while she felt capable again. She looked forward to walking home each evening, passing familiar streets and greeting neighbors who had come to recognize her smiling face. And every night, she returned to the small apartment where she was no longer a guest but part of a fragile, growing family. The little girl had taken it upon herself to include the woman in everything. She dragged her to playgrounds, invited her to help with art projects, and even shared secrets she didn't tell anyone else. The woman listened patiently, laughed sincerely, and in those moments realized how much joy children could bring. Not the loud, demanding kind, but the soft, honest joy that seeped into your heart quietly and lingered there. The father watched all of this with quiet pride. He noticed the way the woman's eyes lit up when his daughter spoke, the way she leaned in to help, and the gentleness with which she treated someone who had trusted her so suddenly. He saw how her laughter had returned, how the stiffness in her shoulders had eased, and how she had begun to carry herself with a quiet confidence. One evening, the three of them gathered on the small balcony, the city lights twinkling in the distance. They had cooked dinner together, eaten slowly, and now sat sipping tea, enjoying the rare quiet of the night. The woman wrapped her hands around the warm cup, feeling its heat seep into her fingers, and glanced at the father. "I never thought a single evening could change everything," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. He smiled, not needing to respond immediately. The little girl leaned her head on his shoulder and said simply, "It did. You're family now." The woman blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the simplicity and honesty of the statement. Family. She had spent so many years chasing the idea of belonging somewhere, only to be disappointed. And yet here in this small apartment with two people who had no obligation to care for her, she finally felt it. Belonging. Life, of course, wasn't perfect. There were days when the past crept in, when she felt the weight of everything she had left behind pressing down on her chest. There were nights when she lay awake, wondering if she had made a mistake, wondering if she truly deserved kindness. But each morning, The sight of the father quietly making breakfast or the little girl running to greet her with a smile reminded her that she wasn't alone. She had choices now, and for the first time, she felt strong enough to make them. One rainy afternoon, similar to the night she had first fallen into the father's arms, she found herself sitting by the window, watching drops race down the glass. The memory of that night came unbidden. The slip, the catch, the quiet understanding of strangers who became something more. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, feeling the coolness seep into her skin, and smiled faintly. If she hadn't stumbled that night, if she hadn't allowed herself to trust someone she didn't know, she would still be lost. The little girl ran up to her suddenly, holding a small notebook filled with drawings. "Look," she said excitedly. "I made a story about us." The woman took the notebook, her heart swelling as she flipped through pages filled with crayon sketches and handwritten words. In the story, she and the father were brave heroes facing storms and challenges together, always supporting each other, always finding a way to laugh in the end. She felt a lump in her throat and hugged the girl tightly. "You're amazing," she whispered. "This is beautiful." The father watched the embrace, a quiet pride in his eyes. He had always known his daughter had a big heart, but seeing it extend to someone who had come into their lives so unexpectedly made him realize just how much love could grow when given the chance. As weeks turned into months, the bond between them deepened. The woman began helping the little girl with homework, reading bedtime stories, and even joining in on small projects at school. She felt needed, appreciated, and most importantly, part of something greater than herself. The father appreciated her presence in ways he hadn't anticipated. He enjoyed the quiet companionship, the shared meals, and the way she listened without judgment. Life had been lonely for him for years, but now it felt lighter, more full. One evening, while they were sitting together after dinner, the woman spoke quietly. "I've been thinking. I never imagined that kindness could change so much. I didn't think anyone would care enough to just be there." The man leaned back in his chair, a small, thoughtful smile on his face. "Sometimes people do care even when it seems impossible. And sometimes we don't realize how much a small act, like a hand to hold or a meal shared, can change someone's life." She nodded, letting the words settle. "I never believed that for myself. I thought I had to survive on my own, that asking for help was weakness." "You're not weak," he said firmly. "It takes courage to accept help, to trust again." "And you've done both?" The little girl, who had been quietly coloring nearby, looked up. "See? I told you she was amazing," she said proudly, holding up her drawing for both adults to see. The woman laughed softly, ruffling the girl's hair. "You were right," she said. "I am lucky to have met you both. Life wasn't without challenges. There were days when work was stressful, when the woman's past tried to catch up with her, when disagreements arose over small, silly things. But through it all, they navigated the moments together, supporting one another without resentment or blame. They learned that family wasn't just about shared blood or history. It was about trust, care, and the willingness to stand together through storms, both literal and figurative. One particularly cold night, the three of them sat by the window, wrapped in blankets, drinking hot chocolate. Snow had begun to fall outside, covering the city in a soft white blanket. The woman watched the flakes drift down and felt a quiet contentment settle over her. "I can't remember the last time I felt like this," she said softly, almost to herself, "like I belong somewhere, like I matter." The man reached over and squeezed her hand gently. "You matter. More than you know." The little girl leaned against the woman, wrapping her arms around her. "You're my family," she said simply, and that was enough. As the months passed, they built routines and traditions of their own. Birthday celebrations, small outings, shared meals, and quiet evenings became markers of a life that had been rebuilt from unexpected circumstances. They laughed more, shared more, and leaned on one another in ways that felt natural and necessary. The woman began to think about her future differently. She considered continuing her education, saving money, and perhaps finding a way to help others who were as lost as she had been. She had discovered that her life didn't have to be defined by fear or pain. It could be defined by hope, connection, and the love she had found unexpectedly at a bus stop on a rainy night. The father noticed these changes too. He realized that his decision to reach out, to offer kindness to a stranger, had not only helped her, It had transformed his life as well. His home was fuller, his heart lighter, and the bond with his daughter strengthened in ways he hadn't imagined possible. The woman had brought laughter, warmth, and perspective back into their lives, and for that, he was quietly grateful every day. One afternoon, while the three of them were walking through the park, the little girl tugged the woman's hand. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything," the woman replied, smiling down at her. "Promise me we'll always be together," the girl said, her eyes earnest. The woman knelt down, meeting the girl's gaze. "I promise," she said softly. "No matter what happens, we'll always have each other." The father watched them, feeling a deep sense of peace. It was true. Life had been unpredictable, messy, and often painful. But in the midst of it, they had found something enduring: love, trust, and the kind of connection that could survive storms and still shine. Years later, they would all look back on that rainy night at the bus stop and marvel at how one small act of kindness had set everything in motion. A simple catch, a warm meal, and an offer to stay had turned strangers into family. It was a story of second chances, of the courage to trust, and of the way lives could intertwine in the most unexpected and beautiful ways. And in the quiet moments when the city slept and the world outside was still, the woman, the father, and the little girl would smile at each other, knowing that their lives had been forever changed, not by grand gestures or sudden miracles, but by the steady, patient human kindness that had begun it all. The days stretched into months, and life continued to unfold gently for the small family. The woman had become more than just a guest in their home. She had become a pillar of their daily lives. She laughed with the little girl over simple games, shared quiet moments with the father, and gradually began to find her own place in a world that had once felt so isolating. The father had also changed. He wasn't just the man who took care of his daughter. He had become someone who found joy in sharing his life with others, who welcomed unexpected turns in the road instead of fearing them. He had learned from his daughter and from the woman that love wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up every day in small but significant ways. Still, no matter how much time passed, there were moments when the past crept back into the woman's mind. She could feel the old fears, the hesitation trying to resurface. It was hard not to question whether the peace she had found could really last, whether it was too good to be true. But each time that doubt surfaced, she reminded herself of the small, everyday things: the way the little girl smiled when she finished a drawing, the way the father offered a quiet word of encouragement when things got tough, and the way she had found herself at home here, truly at home for the first time in years. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, the little girl looked up from her book and asked, "Are you ever going to tell me about where you came from?" The woman paused, taken off guard. For weeks now, they had all shared pieces of their lives, but she had held back the full story of who she was, where she had come from. It wasn't out of shame, but out of uncertainty. She wasn't sure if they needed to know, or if she was ready to share the parts of herself that still felt fragile, still felt unfinished. But the question hung in the air, and she realized that perhaps it was time to answer. Maybe it was time to stop hiding from the parts of herself that still needed healing. "I don't know if I can tell you everything," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "but I'll tell you what I can." She took a deep breath and began, carefully choosing her words. She spoke of her childhood, of a family that had once been whole, and of how she had always felt like an outsider in her own home. She talked about the fights, the endless misunderstandings, and the feeling that she was never truly seen. She didn't share all the painful details, but she gave them enough to understand where she had come from, the loneliness that had followed her for years, and the sense of being trapped in a life she hadn't chosen. The little girl listened quietly, her brow furrowed as she absorbed the words. When the woman finished, there was a long silence. Then the little girl looked up at her, her eyes wide and serious. "I think it's good that you're here," she said simply. "You're not alone anymore." The woman smiled, her heart heavy with gratitude. "No, I'm not." The father, who had been silently listening from across the room, finally spoke. "You know, we all have our stories. None of us are perfect, but it's what we do with those stories that matter." The woman nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. He was right. What mattered was not where she had come from, but where she was going now. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a future worth fighting for. The next few weeks brought new challenges. The woman's job at the bookstore had given her a sense of independence, But it also came with its own set of stresses. The hours were long, the customers demanding, and the pressure to keep up with the constant flow of new books and tasks was sometimes overwhelming. But she never complained. Not because she didn't want to, but because she realized something important. She was no longer carrying the burden of the past alone. The father and daughter had become her support system, her reminder that she didn't have to face the world in isolation. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at work, she came home feeling drained. She could barely hold her eyes open as she stepped into the apartment, but the sight of the little girl bouncing toward her with a bright smile was enough to make her heart lift. "You're home," the girl said, throwing her arms around the woman's waist. "I made something for you." The woman smiled tiredly but gratefully. "What did you make?" With a flourish, the little girl handed over a piece of paper filled with colorful scribbles. "It's a picture of us," she said, beaming with pride. The woman took the drawing, her exhaustion fading for a moment as she admired the innocent depiction of their little family. The woman, the father, and the little girl, all holding hands beneath a shining sun. It was simple, but it was perfect. "This is beautiful," the woman whispered. "Thank you. You're welcome," the girl replied, looking up at her with wide, trusting eyes. The father came into the room just then, his face soft with concern. "Tough day?" he asked quietly. The woman nodded. "Yeah, but nothing I can't handle." "You don't have to handle everything alone," he said, walking over to her. He gently took the drawing from her hands and smiled. "We've got your back, you know." She looked at him, her chest tight with the weight of unspoken emotions. "I know, sometimes I forget how lucky I am." The father's expression softened. "We're lucky too. None of this would be the same without you." For a moment they stood there in the soft light, a small family bound together by trust, kindness, and the willingness to embrace the unexpected. The woman realized that while her journey hadn't been easy, it had led her here, into a place where love and acceptance weren't things she had to fight for, but things she could give and receive freely. As the evening went on, they shared a simple dinner, the father telling stories from his own childhood that made the little girl giggle, the woman contributing her own memories of her early days at the bookstore. Laughter filled the room, and for the first time in a while, the woman didn't feel like she was pretending to fit in. She felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The weeks continued to pass, bringing both the ordinary and the extraordinary. The woman's bond with the little girl grew even stronger. They read together, played together, and shared small secrets that only they knew. She had become not just a part of their lives, but a part of their hearts, and in return she gave all that she could, her time, her care, her understanding, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was truly living. One night after putting the little girl to bed, the father and woman sat together in the quiet of the living room. The city outside was alive, the sound of cars and people drifting through the window. They sat in comfortable silence for a while before he spoke. "Do you ever think about your future?" he asked gently. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I think about it more now. I'm not sure exactly what it looks like yet, but I think I'm ready to figure it out." He smiled, his eyes warm. "You don't have to have everything figured out right now. You've come so far already." She looked at him, grateful for his steady presence. "Thank you. For everything." He nodded, the silence between them full of unspoken understanding. They had both come from places of pain and uncertainty, but together they had built something new, something better. And for the first time in a long time, she felt confident that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together.